Hello, and welcome back to episode 6 of the Heavy Fen Podcast, the show where I, your host, Christian, sits alone in a room and talks to you about storytelling, why it's cool, and why we need to approach it responsibly. Not my best intro, probably, but it's the one we have, and so often we have to work with the things we have rather than the best ones. I'm tangenting. Welcome back, everybody. Today's topic is stereotypes and stereotyping. A pretty normal episode today, although I'm certain that as we continue, I will find myself on some wild tangent and will explore some ultra deep, I don't know. I'm certain that the topic will mutate as we discuss it, but as far as the plan is, we're just talking about stereotypes. Very normal, very tame, very common subject. Stereotypes, what they are, how you should use them, how you can approach them, and probably examples in various forms of narrative media. You all know what a stereotype is, but we're going to define it either way. Anyway. Not either way. Anyway, we're going to define it anyway, because maybe you don't know what a stereotype is. Maybe you just need a refresher, and maybe I'm just at a loss for words to say. So, what exactly is a stereotype? Stereotype, noun, a set idea that people have about what something or someone is like, especially an idea that is wrong. That's actually a very interesting dictionary definition, because I think that second point is incorrect. Here's another one. An idea that is used to describe a particular type of person or thing, or a person or thing thought to represent such an idea. That one I actually like significantly more. And once again, welcome to Language 101. Words and the ways we define them exist in this kind of constant loop of evolution. So that little add-on about especially an idea that is wrong, which I'm not actually super pleased that is a thing that is in a dictionary website. Come on, Cambridge. I don't know why that's there, but we'll get to that point in a second. But yeah, so I'm sorry. We're going off in a bunch of different ways. What is a stereotype? Well, according to the dictionary and the colloquial use, it is an idea of what something or someone is like. That's basically it. A stereotype is just your concept of what this is supposed to be like. For example, the stereotype of an American citizen: loud, loves guns, and is very obnoxious, probably overweight. Stereotype of a well, this is an American stereotype. Once again, I'm using the American stereotypes because I am American. Stereotype of a French person. There are... Okay, that's actually surprisingly hard. There's like the joke stereotype of a French person, which is just, the very snooty, has a super deep accent, thinks Americans are stupid, and, likes snails. That's like a joking stereotype of a French person. That's not like the actual stereotype. I actually don't know what the generally held opinion of a specifically French citizen is like. I think, by and large, a lot of those have kind of fallen by the wayside. Just with the advent of, this digital age of everyone being constantly connected and all of that. A lot of stereotypes kind of break down and get basically just cross-examined into the dirt, which there's actually a surprising negative side to that, which is also something that we will talk about as we're diving into this topic. But yeah, so what is a stereotype? It is just the idea of what someone or something is like. That's the entire thing. We've spent far too long on the definition, so let's kind of move forward. So stereotypes, a bit of a, I don't know about a taboo subject, but definitely I think a bit of a touchy subject when it comes to storytelling. Once again, I myself am primarily a writer, and I know for a fact this is a huge thing for writers talking about like avoiding the use of stereotypes. And I know that this leaks into film as well, and even in some visual arts, just with like depictions of different cultures and things. Now, the question that's kind of hovering around, which we're gonna answer right now, should you use stereotypes? I mean, okay, so yes, you should, but there are, a bunch of caveats and a bunch of like asterisks onto that. Yes, but the simple answer is yes, it is okay to use stereotypes. Now, why is that what I'm saying? Because, I can already hear you kind of like scratching your head, being like, but Christian, stereotypes are a bad thing. Stereotypes promote harmful ideas and separation and othering of different cultures and people. You should never use a stereotype because like there's no such thing as someone who fits a stereotype. And you are correct. And you should never use a stereotype like that. When you are using stereotypes, what I mean, when I say, yes, it's okay to use stereotypes, it's the idea of just how characters are different from actual people, to a degree, necessitates a level of stereotyping. Now, to kind of paint an example of this, a stereotype can also fall into like a personality. Like, you've probably seen or heard of like I don't know if this is as big of a thing right now, but I know like not long ago it kind of was the whole like, oh, what's your star sign? I can like tell stuff about your personality based off of your star sign. Like that is a stereotype. And even the person who does that, like the image in your head of the person who does that, which I am 90% sure that a lot of you will have an image of like, oh yeah, this is the kind of person who will be like, oh, I can read your personality based on your star sign. That's also a stereotype. Stereotype is just a representation of something. So on that level, they are not an inherent evil. Now, I should get like a little sound effect to use when there's nuance, because, oh boy, is this a nuanced subject that you need to take a breath and think about. When you are writing, or any other form of engaging with character and stories, everything you do can be a form of stereotyping. Like, that's just the way that it works. Every character you write will be flatter than a real flesh and blood person by virtue of they're not actually real people. Which means that on some level you're not hitting a certain depth on a thing. Like a great example of this actually is for those of you who have read the Stormlight Archive, in the first book, The Way of Kings, there's this character whose name is Kaladin. He's a super fascinating character. I love him, and we will be talking about him again in a future episode where I talk about mental illness and the depictions of that. But the reason I bring him up, he struggles with mental illness and also comes from a culture where there's a lot of stratification and racism. To kind of putting it bluntly, it's like it is racism, but it isn't. It's a fantasy book. You should go read The Way of Kings. It's very good. I'm not going to dive too deeply into it because I don't want to like do any spoilers or anything. I think it's a fantastic book that you should read. But going back to the character of Kaladin, Kaladin fits a bunch of quote unquote stereotypes about someone in his position. He struggles with depression. You see him going through certain depressive episodes. He is part of an oppressed group. You see him fitting into like the kind of that resentful, oppressed person stereotype. He also goes through a whole hero's arc, and you see him fitting into that stereotype. Like the reason I'm talking about like these bunch of interconnecting stereotypes. For any of you who have read this book, Kaladin is an incredibly complex, deep character who is super well fleshed out, super well realized. Like, no one would ever accuse Brandon Sanderson of engaging in stereotype when doing an analysis of the character of Kaladin. But by virtue of the fact that Kaladin is not an actual flesh and blood person, he cannot be as complex as an actual person. There's just a level of impossibility because he's a fictional character created by Brandon Sanderson instead of an actual person. So, saying that, there are aspects of Kaladin which are way flatter, to use a terrible word, way flatter than an actual person going through his struggles would be. Now, that's kind of a feature and not a bug. It has to be, because he's a character going through the story, and no matter how well fleshed out this character is, he still has to do things in the story other than explore a single facet of his personality. Now, I've spent a super long time talking about, oh, look, this is a super complex character who you can also kind of look at as a bunch of stereotypes in a trench coat. All going back to this point of me saying, yes, stereotypes are okay to use, but, like I said, there are a bunch of asterisks. This is where the nuance is. Because it's not just, oh yeah, I can just use, quote, the stereotype, end quote, of X thing, people group, or whatever. No, you cannot do that at all. That is not how stereotypes should be used, nor is it how they were really intended to be. We're going to dive into kind of the origin of what a stereotype actually is and like why they came into existence as we're going forward. But very, very seriously, you cannot just use a stereotype. That's not what I'm saying. Now, you can use stereotypes to great effect, but you can't just use them. There are certain things you have to do, hoops you have to jump through, levels of groundwork you have to accomplish before you can effectively and responsibly use a stereotype. So, no more kind of waffling back and forth. Let's get into actually, the who's, nuts, bolts, and all that stuff. So let's start by talking about what are stereotypes and, what are they for? So, what is the purpose of a stereotype? Why are they a thing? Well, I'm trying to find like a longer way of saying it, but it's pretty simple actually. If someone asks you what color a tree was, you will say probably green. Maybe you'll throw in some brown. And, maybe if it's a cool tree that has flowers or whatever, you'll add in a couple other colors based off of those. But you are simplifying the actual visual of that tree in order to communicate it to another person. The words that you say most likely cannot convey the actual visual of the tree that you received. Honestly, nothing short of actually taking that person and going to that tree that you're discussing is really able to fully convey the actual visual of that tree. Now, what does that mean as it pertains to stereotypes? Well, you have engaged in stereotyping by describing that tree as green, maybe with a couple hints of brown and, pink or white if it's a flowering tree. You have simplified the full complexity of that tree and used that simplification as a way of explaining what you saw. That is what a stereotype is. That's what the origin point is. Not, as some people would have you believe, as a way for people to attack each other, but just as a way for people who went to other places to talk about those other places. Stereotypes emerge from the stories, from the information that people who did not go to certain places received from people who did. You've probably, or maybe you haven't or not, like if you've had a friend who's gone on a trip that you didn't go, you've heard them talk about that trip, and, you've made assumptions and formed thoughts based off of what they said. That's where these stereotypes come from. Now, don't hear what I'm not saying. Stereotypes absolutely did become a negative thing as they kind of evolved and as they took on kind of a life of their own, separate from the context of what they were supposed to be for. You know, like going back to, I mentioned the French thing. The negative French stereotype used in America a lot during, I want to say it was the earlier to mid 1900s. I believe this was due to some things that happened during World War II. That all historical information I'm not 100% sure on, so don't quote me on that. But if you are an American citizen, you are at least faintly aware that there is a joking negative French stereotype that used to be way more prevalent and, you know, still kind of is as just like a bit because, you know, oh wow, making fun of people is sometimes funny. That's shocker. That negative French stereotype that's used to mock French people, that's a bad thing. That is a negative stereotype which emerged for a purpose, but if you follow that stereotype back far enough, that stereotype does just come from people who were in France, met French people, and came back and talked about their experiences. Now, that act of talking about your experiences isn't inherently good or bad, but it can very much be good or bad depending on who's talking and how and for what purpose and what they're saying. But once again, the actual thing of the stereotype is not in and of itself evil. So let's kind of release the idea that stereotypes are inherently and completely bad, because once again, like it's a little bit more complicated than that. Stereotypes in and of themselves are nothing. It is completely and utterly dependent on who made them, what they were made for, and how they're used. Now, we've talked about what they are, what they're for, and where they came from, but I just want to kind of hammer in the point, once again, like I was kind of using when I was talking about Kaladin, why you can't really escape the act of stereotyping. No matter what you do in your stories, when you're depicting something, you have to do some simplification. Like, there's just a degree of simplification that comes with you are translating an idea from your head to someone else's head. Words aren't perfect, and as awesome as they are, there is some stuff that gets lost in translation. So you are going to end up simplifying things. You're going to end up stereotyping them so that you can easily and quickly convey information into whoever it is who is consuming it. I was about to say reader, but once again, could be a viewer, could be a listener, could be any of that stuff. But you can't really escape that act. You're always going to be simplifying as you're telling this story. Going back to the tree illustration that I used before. You can't there is no amount of words that you can use to perfectly convey the visual of a tree that someone else has not seen. You're always going to be a little bit off. Or at the very least, they will interpret you a little bit off. So instead of having this intense fear, this intense kind of like hyper anxiety about, you can never use stereotypes and you have to avoid them and stuff. Let's talk about, once again, what they are, what they're for, which we just did, and how to use them responsibly. Now, once again, before we get into this section, talking about what is the correct use of a stereotype, I would just like to reiterate, I am not saying to stereotype things. I'm not saying to, take big things such as culture, such as personality traits, types, people, and to simplify them because, you can't avoid it. No. If you're working with a complex subject, work with that complex subject with the respect for what that subject is. There is an amount of simplification that you'll have to do just to translate things into the story and then from the story into the person consuming that story. But the onus on you as the person, as the creator, is to do that with the utmost care and respect and to the highest level of accuracy that is possible. So, I mean, yeah, that's kind of the entire thought. Like, I don't think that I've said anything too confusing with that. We'll still dive into it, obviously, but like, once again, it just goes back to the point which I kind of keep hammering in. You simply have to care. You simply have to care, and in so caring, go the extra mile to ensure that you have a firm and complete grasp of whatever it is you're talking about, so that even when you're simplifying correctly. There is such thing as a bad stereotype and perpetuating a harmful idea, and a quote-unquote good stereotype where you are just simplifying a complex subject but not removing the parts of it that are important. For example, we're going to use the most common thing that people think of when they talk about stereotypes, which is the stereotyping of culture. And you've seen it all before, like the I want to say it was the 50s. I don't remember what decade it was. Do not come here for pinpoint historical accuracy. Oftentimes I'll be off by a little bit, but there was, as you all are somewhat aware probably, this idea, like the stereotype of the Chinaman. It's a horrible, terrible thing, which was born out of a lot of kind of calling it how it was, anti-immigrant sentiment, racism, and all that stuff, like this anxiety just from these people who I don't understand coming to where I live. And that in and of itself is a whole different conversation, which we're not going to have because that's not what this is for. But yes, that stereotype of the Chinaman, terrible, bad. It's just not good. It is specifically used to mock, to degrade, to demean. On the other side, there is the frequent use of Asian adjacent cultures in fantasy and stuff like that. You'll see fictitious countries, which are basically just, we turned what we know of China into fantasy elfland and stuff like that. Now, that isn't inherently bad, but there is also a level of maybe study it a bit more so that you understand the stuff that you're using. For example, like architecture and like religious symbols and things like that. They're cool. They're very cool. I love the Golden Lion statues. But if you're just going to throw them around your story, it's worth it to take the extra time to understand what they mean to the culture that you're taking them from, because you cannot respect something and not know it. And if you don't know the thing that you're using, you'll be taking it outside of its original context, and you'll be creating a version of that thing which is incorrect. And you can do that, and it's fine, but you have to do that intentionally. Ignorance is not an excuse when you are engaging in the craft of storytelling. You, as a storyteller, have the responsibility to know what you're talking about before you talk about it, because this thing you're going to create will outlive you and will outreach you. So if you're putting something out into the world, you have to know exactly what you're doing with it. So when working with a culture that you're unfamiliar with, it is okay to simplify things, because you cannot derail your entire project to talk about the minute intricacies of this particular cloth pattern. No matter how cool those intricacies are, it's just not the focus of your story, most likely. And if it is, awesome. Go that extra mile. But if it's not, you have to still understand that it is important before you start screwing around with it. Because if you screw around with it without the knowledge of what it actually is, your screwing around can cause damages, can perpetuate bad ideas, can create negative stereotypes, which aren't even necessarily mean-spirited, but they are perpetuating misunderstandings, which is almost as bad because it is widening that gap of communication. Stories should connect us, so make good connections. Another point for how to use stereotypes well, this is kind of this is a point to how to use them well, but it's more of a point of how to not use them, which is basically just, like I was saying before, you have to know what you're talking about. Never use a stereotype as a basis for understanding. You will have, just because you're a person, some preconceived notions about whatever you're working with. Don't operate out of those ever. Unless you are if you have spent time studying whatever you're working with before you started on this project, awesome. Cool. You are probably more equipped to let your preconceived notions just kind of go because you spent time studying that thing. But you'll also know that you should still study that thing in case you missed something. And if you don't have any sort of familiarity with what you're working with, get it. We live in the age of almost unrestricted, infinite information on any topic at your hands, at your fingertips, immediately. If you are able to listen to this podcast, you are most likely able to get your hands on sources, information, and cultural artifacts that will teach you infinitely more than the wuxia book that you read can accurately teach you about Chinese culture. Never let simplifications form the basis for your understanding. Become familiar with the stuff you're working with, or just work with stuff that you're already familiar with. I think that branching out is a wonderful thing, but it does come with a lot of work, especially to do it right. That's what this entire episode is about. Like, not branching out negatively. If you're going to branch out, there's a lot of work you got to do. But I promise it can be a lot of fun learning about these new cultures and stuff. Like, I personally, I'm a huge fanatic for Japanese culture. The story behind that is not very interesting. I watched anime in high school and I was like, oh, that's cool. And then I started learning about the culture and I was like, wow, that culture's awesome. And that's the end of it. The culture's really cool and I've just learned a lot about it. I am by no means at a point where I would be super comfortable writing about like life in a city in Japan. It's not something I know a lot about, but I have taken steps to gain a familiarity with Japanese culture because I think it's like really, really cool. And it was super fun. Like, research has this really bad rap. Like, we're always trying to avoid having to do research. And, school might be to blame for that. But once again, this is not the scope of this podcast. Research is actually fun. I promise you. If you decide something that you want to learn about and work with, that will be one of the most fun and fulfilling things that you've ever done. One of my classes in college, because my college was really cool, was specifically based on this concept of, hey, what if we just teach you how to research well, and then you pick what you research, and that's what you do your final project on. It's one of the most fun things I've ever done. It's also how I learned how Nevada was founded. That's such a tangent. Such a tangent. We're not going to go into the divorce colony thing, although it's such a fascinating concept, and if you have time, definitely look up what a divorce colony was. It was kind of wild. It's kind of insane. But yeah, do your research. Never let stereotypes, never let simplifications form your basis for understanding. Just don't. It's more fun to learn about it anyway, and also you can perpetuate miscommunications, either that you formed based off of a simplification, or that simplification just has in it. You've heard it said, don't believe everything you read or everything you see. Don't. Verify. Go the extra mile. I know it sounds so hard because, you have to go an additional mile. It's so tough. But I promise you, it is worth it. It is fun. And also, if you don't do it, you then become the perpetuator of a problem. And that's not good. It's not cool. You shouldn't do that. And basically the final point for how to use stereotypes or how to stereotype responsibly, that sentence is going to sound real great as a soundbite out of context. Yeah, final point is just only use them, like I said, in conjunction with a decent understanding of whatever you're working with. Whether that be a culture, whether that be a personality type, or an illness, or a flavor of disability, or like anything that you are working with, you will end up simplifying in your story. So only do that when you are at a point of decent understanding. And, well, this is the tricky part. There's no benchmark that you can pass to tell you when you know enough. There isn't a test that you can take. There's not I don't know what. There's not I already said there's no test. There's no proctor. There's no exam. Like, there's no thing that you can do that I'm aware of that will give you the gold star of, you know enough to talk about this thing. I really hate the whole thing of like, listen, I'm not an expert, but, so-and-so opinion. You don't have to be an expert. I know I've spent the last however long harping on and on about how you have to learn and study whatever you're simplifying and stereotyping so that you're doing that correctly. But you don't have to know everything. You can't know everything. Experts don't know everything. Expert is a word to describe someone who has a high level of proficiency with something. You're an expert at breathing because you've been breathing your entire life. Notice how there are people who breathe better than you, people who know more about breathing techniques than you, and yet here you are, an expert at breathing. That's how it works. The difference between you and someone who is an expert in something is just they spent time learning about something and now they're calling themselves an expert. Like, that's it. There's no magic button. There's no sticker. There's no change. They are the same as you. They think the same as you. They understand the same as you. They make mistakes the same as you. You do not need to be an expert in X topic in order to talk about it or to think about it or to have opinions. Inform your opinion, ask questions, learn and study, but you don't need to become an expert. You don't have to get a college degree in freaking thermodynamics to research how a plane engine might work or like how a radiator functions. That information's free. You can just learn it, and then congratulations, now you have that information. Oh my lord. The whole expertise thing is something that I will definitely circle back to in a future episode because it really gets under my skin whenever I see people being like, oh, well, I'm no expert, so I don't really feel comfortable having an opinion. My lord, it's okay. You can have thoughts if you haven't spent your entire life studying a thing. You're allowed to think about more than one thing. I understand that this is kind of getting very far off the point of the stereotyping thing. And I do think that we've gone through all the points, and we'll recap it in a second. But, just to let me finish this tangent, when you are studying, when you're learning, I feel like there's this myth, this perpetuated idea of a point where you're done learning. That's not true. I would consider myself to at least be very close to a level of quote-unquote expertise as it comes to the craft of writing and storytelling. And yet there are people who are so much better than me. People who know so much more than me. Like, I'm not at the level of, like, Brandon Sanderson or Patrick Rothfuss yet, on a craft level anyway. But that doesn't mean that I don't know anything. And even if I'm not a quote-unquote expert, I do know what I'm talking about. Like, I've spent time learning. You're allowed to have thoughts. You're allowed to have opinions. You're allowed to think my voice matters, even if I might not have all the pieces. Acknowledge what you don't know. Go forward with what you do. That's what experts do. That's what people who are learning do. And that's what you should do. All right. tangent over. Let's go back over the points of how to engage with stereotyping well and responsibly before I go off the rails again. So, point 1. Are stereotypes inherently bad, evil, or wrong? No. Stereotypes are just a form of simplification in order to communicate an idea about something that is basically external, for lack of a better term. So, for example, I saw a tree, my friend didn't. Anything I tell them about that tree is me now creating a stereotype of trees for that person who has not seen this tree. Likewise, if I went to another country, came back and was talking about it, like anytime you are translating a one-sided experience, you're engaging in a form of stereotyping just because you're now creating an idea in that person's head or in someone else's head about what that thing is. It's just a simplification which creates an understanding which is imperfect by virtue of the fact that you're not at the source. That doesn't mean it's completely incorrect. It doesn't mean it's inherently evil. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means that it's imperfect, like the entire world. So let's all take a collective breath and chill out. That was point 1. Point 2. Can you use stereotypes in a story and still be storytelling responsibly? Absolutely. It requires a lot of care and research and understanding about whatever you're engaging with at all. But the act of stereotyping or simplification, which is what it is not an inherent bad and isn't going to damage the integrity of your project, whatever that project is. Point 3. Never use stereotypes or other people's simplifications as a basis for your own understanding of a thing. Always, 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 if you're going to make a story that works with anything that you are unfamiliar with, learn about that thing you're unfamiliar with until you feel like you know enough to start working with it. Whether that means you have to spend like a year studying military tactics or, a week scanning over, doctor reports on a particular type of medical disorder. However long you need to work to understand something, to feel comfortable talking about it, only you can really know that. Yes, you might make mistakes. You probably will. That's okay. As long as you are approaching it from a point of genuine desire to communicate and translate experiences and thoughts and all of that stuff through your story to other people, whatever you come up with will have the baseline of I tried my best. And that is all anyone can ask of you. Try your best. Actually try your best. But try your best. What point are we on? 4? Yeah, point 4. I guess I just kind of did point 4. The level to which you need to understand something to talk about it is almost completely subjective and just relies on comfortability. But always, always, always make sure that you are engaging with primary sources. And yeah, primary sources, the source of whatever you're talking about. I think my numbered list is actually wrong, which is fine. It's fine because this is a more free-form type thing. But I think we hit all the big points. Stereotypes are not inherently a bad thing. It is depending on what they are, what they're used for, who made them, and why. Don't use stereotypes to help you understand something, but you can use them to translate stuff through your stories. That's just what's going to happen anyway. You just have to approach it from the perspective of, I am trying to create the most correct stereotype I can. Going back to the character example I used of Kaladin from The Way of Kings, super complex character, one of my favorites, one of, honestly, I would argue, the best written protagonists in so long, full of depth, full of intricacies, all that stuff. Because he is not a person, there is stereotyping going on there. Once again, stereotype is just a flavor of simplification. I kind of like... My train of thought keeps like going in and out with this as I'm talking about it, but I do believe that I've effectively communicated what I was aiming for. And honestly, pretty succinctly, too. Like, I don't actually know how long this is going to end up being, but yeah, no, like, the time feels, like, pretty good. It's not, like, a huge topic, but it is one that I do feel we need to talk about, because it's become one of those buzzwords where, you know, you hear the word, oh, engages in stereotyping, and everyone's like, oh no, stereotyping, and starts clutching at their imaginary internet pearls, when everyone engages in a flavor of stereotyping, because we have not thought about what these words actually mean and what these actions actually are. Negative stereotyping is bad and awful, and, you know, can be a signal for any number of other things, but simplifying is not a bad thing. You simplify everything in order to packet your understanding and communicate that. That's how language works. Oh, I just kicked my microphone. That sucks. I'm going to have to deal with that later. Oh dear. But yeah, okay. I've talked on about stereotyping and all of that stuff long enough. So I am now going to end the episode here, because I think we've reached a pretty satisfying conclusion. Oh, yeah, there's one last point on my list of things. Please don't cancel me. The subject of stereotyping and its uses in storytelling and, you know, this kind of nuanced look that I was giving at it is understandably a little bit of a heated topic, let's say. And rightly so. Stereotyping has been used for a lot of bad over the last couple years. Not last couple years, my apologies. Over the last human history. Stereotypes are, like anything, both used for a lot of bad and sometimes used for good. But the bad tends to outshine the good in the history books. And, you know, we're not saying that, I'm not saying that the past examples of negative stereotyping should be ignored or forgotten. I am simply saying, let's reevaluate what these words actually mean and approach that correctly. So I guess another way that you could look at this episode is just portrayal. It's just something that you have to approach delicately. It's something that you have to be very careful with your approach for, especially if it's something that you're not directly connected to. It meaning whatever you're portraying or talking about, or quote stereotyping unquote. Yeah, and like I am a little bit nervous about talking about this. I'm, you know, talking about it, so I'm not like nervous to the point of inaction. But this is one of those episodes where I am putting it together and thinking to myself, oh boy, I hope that it doesn't go over too poorly. And I don't really think it will. So we're hoping that that's going to be enough. And we're also going to hope that I, myself, did the proper amount of research and thought into this before I started talking about it. And, you know, if I didn't, you guys can let me know in the comments, in the reviews, all that stuff. But we are going to leave here now. Thank you all so much for listening to this episode. I'm, once again, just super excited that I live in a time where I get to make something like this and put it out there for people to hopefully get something out of. You can, once again, find me on all of the social media platforms. Well, okay, not all of the social media platforms. A bunch of them, specifically YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, and Blue Sky as well, I guess. At Chandelarian. If you are one of the YouTube listeners, go ahead and subscribe to the thing if you like this episode. If you're on a different platform, also go ahead and follow the show so that you don't miss the future episodes. I have a lot of fun episodes planned, and that list of planned episodes is ever expanding and massive, and it's super exciting. I'm super excited about the future, but I generally am. I enjoy being excited. I think it's a preferable state. But yeah, thank you all so much for listening. I have been Chandelarian, and I hope you have a great rest of your day, night, or whatever time it is, wherever you are. And I will see you all next time. All right. Bye-bye.